Yeast infection bleeding can primarily be found in females. Vaginal yeast can lead to bleeding and even more irritation once you put medication on it. This is why natural cures for yeast infection bleeding are better than any other treatment. The occurrence of yeast infection bleeding can be found on kids with rashes and thrush. These patches usually bleed due to scratching. These kinds of yeast infection bleeding can also be treated naturally. Vaginal discharges, painful sex, and sexual dysfunction, rashes and bruising are all signs of yeast infections. These can all lead to yeast infection bleeding. These signs are not always apparent to the victim of yeast infections. Here are other signs that can mean you have yeast infections: sudden depression without triggers, feeling restless without knowing why, premature aging, learning and memory problems, among others. Getting medication and drugs is good, but they don't work necessarily. This is because they are merely treating the symptoms and not the underlying cause of the yeast infection. The truth is that these giant drug companies cannot patent the natural cures, hence they make their own medication that are quite ineffective for the consumer. Let me share with you 3 natural treatments that can cure yeast infection bleeding. First, I highly recommend you to stop spending so much money on yeast infection treatment products that do not work. Use that money and invest in your knowledge about yeast infection instead. If you don't know where to start, I recommend you to pick up the ebook Yeast Infection No More, written by Linda Allen. I have used her unique 5-step method to help me cure my yeast infection in as little as 12 hours. Raw honey can be used to prevent yeast infections in the first place. You can put honey on your tampon. Leave it for a few moments and then rinse with non-medicated soap. Raw honey is great as a probiotic. Probiotic means that raw honey can facilitate the growth of helpful bacteria. These bacteria are great at preventing yeast and fungus from being infectious on our body. Apple cider vinegar bath. Put a part of apple cider vinegar on your bath water and soak in it for a few minutes. Apple cider vinegar will not make you smelly. In fact, it can be used to treat smelly athlete's foot. This is because apple cider vinegar are great at balancing the pH of your body. They are also great antifungal agent. Virgin coconut oil can be placed topically on yeast infection bleeding. It will soothe the wound, and it has a great antifungal effect on the yeast infection as well. Yeast infection bleeding has been reported by a few people who are undergoing menopause. If you are in the same situation, you need to see a doctor because the cases are quite isolated. You are not supposed to suffer an infection that causes bleeding, therefore, make a point of having a professional rule out other infections and conditions.